We are on the air. All right. Well, I don't know. Some of you got the text, some of you didn't. 5 pillars. We're going to talk about 5 pillars. Could be very distressing to some as soon when I start talking about this. The lesson for today in the Course in Miracles, the title of the lesson is, There is Another Way of Looking at the World. And this lesson is an attempt to recognize that we can shift our perception of the world. So however it is that we're seeing it. And it's interesting. Sometimes we're having a good day, and so our perception of the world is like good at that particular time. What I want to say about that is, even though it seems good, we could still change our perception and it could be better. But the problem is also, when it seems good, that a lot of times is fleeting, that these challenges come in like right behind, or there's something that's not quite good enough, it's not quite satisfying enough. It's we start wishing and hoping and dreaming for something even better. There's something in us that seems to not be satisfied even when things are good. And then, of course, when things are bad, we can really start feeling sorry for ourselves. But this lesson is this attempt to come to that recognition that it's actually up to us how we see it. And so we can examine what's going on with us. First, we take the outer perspective, right? We see things happening around us, and those things that are happening around us seem to be having certain effect on us. Part of this recognition should be that we actually allow those effects to occur. None of it's being forced on us. We're deciding how we're reacting to these things that are occurring in front of us. But the most important thing is to realize that we can actually change the inner aspect, that we can look at things differently. The story that I want to tell this morning is a story that I told years ago, and it's actually from an article in a bicycling magazine. Andy and I had a couple of friends who we haven't met yet, but we still consider them our friends, who decided that they were going to take a bicycling trip to Iran. Now, this at the time when they decided to do that, this was before 9/11. This was before the Taliban showed us how crazy they were by blowing up that 2,000-year-old cliff sculpture of the Buddha, because that was an offense to their fundamentalism. This was before the worst, I guess what we would say is the worst of the terrorism. But it was still a time when we were quite aware of terrorist activity. And for the most part, we here in the West had a view of the Middle East as being a bunch of crazy people. So it was after, but you know, it's interesting talking about change of perspective. For years before, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, even though still we in the West really didn't understand Islam, if you knew anyone who was a Muslim, you knew that they were peaceful, and that their whole philosophy of life was concerning the equality of all people and peace. And so there was a shift in perspective. It wasn't just us. I mean, we didn't just all of a sudden decide one day that they were bad. There was a shift in perspective in the Islamic community also. And there was a rise of fundamentalism. And this really goes along with this lesson for today, this whole shift in our consciousness concerning the Middle East and the people there. And by the way, I mean, statistically speaking, it is a very small minority of Islamic people that are fundamentalists, very small. But it seems like they've gotten a very large voice. Years ago, when we started to see this rise in what we call terrorism, there was a pretty smart guy, and his name is eluding me right now, but he made a comment about it, and he said, terrorism is the last refuge of the weak. And what he was saying was that those people who feel like they are totally powerless to change their situation are willing to do this kind of activity because they believe that that's the only way. So here's another shift in perspective. Because it's easy to, when we see these things happen and we get scared, and when I say we get scared, that means then we get mad, that we see these folks as doing things to us just because like they're bad people, right? They're just bad people. Not only they're bad people, but we think we can't get our mind around what's going on with them to motivate them. But what this man was telling us is it's very easy for us to understand what motivates them. They believe that they're backed into a corner and they only have a certain amount of options, and so they're taking those options. And then, of course, speaking again about perspective, those folks who are taking those drastic options, their perspective is that they have been forced into this position. So we're not trying to justify anything here. We're just trying to paint the picture so that maybe we can get a better perspective about what's going on and realize that all people are kind of motivated by the same driving needs. And when we are behaving badly, and when I say we, I mean all of us, including those who right now we may be seeing as apart from us, we're behaving badly because we think we're justified in our behavior. We actually think we've got reasons, and we could actually, if you're willing to sit down and if someone's willing to listen, we would be able to tell them our reasons for acting badly. Even when we know we've acted badly, we'll come up with an excuse or two as to why we had to do it, why it was forced on us. Well, anyway, these guys, now there was, as I say, there was terrorism going on, and these guys decided that they were going to take this bicycling trip to Iran. They were worried about it. They were a little bit nervous about it because not only was there even at that time, there was a rise in terrorist kinds of activity, but the very countryside that they were going to be riding in, they thought they could be the victims of bandits. I mean, there were a number of things that could happen. Anyway, they took a boat. They took a ship. Did a cruise, and took their bikes with them. And when they arrived in the port, they disembarked and brought their bicycles down and their panniers filled with their equipment and their few clothes that they had brought along with them. And there at the end of the dock was the customs official. And he was a big, burly, black-haired man with huge mustachio. And their comment was he looked like a young Saddam Hussein, and very gruff looking. And he looked them over and was about to ask them a question, and he noticed their bicycles. And a big smile comes across his face. And he said in broken English, "You're a cyclist." He says, "I am a cyclist. There is my bike." And there, propped up against the wall over there, was this old, gigantic, old, heavy, one-speed bicycle sitting there that had seen better days. And they had a connection between them, the fear that had been there. And what these guys had done was they had actually stepped out on faith. They had said that yes, there are some obstacles in our path. There are some things that we know, there's some danger, there's some things, but they both related that they had a sense that not only was that they were kind of like they were supposed to do this, like they were supposed to take this trip. It was supposed to be part of their life story, but that they also had a sense, a belief, a knowing, if you will, that everything was going to be all right. So here we see, right from the very beginning of their story, we see what's going along with the lesson for today, that they had a shift in perspective. They had a shift in perspective, and so even if it was just a small one, was the custom agent waiting for them at the end of that dock. But also we see the first pillar in the 5 pillars of Islam. These 5 pillars of Islam are the basis for the faith, for the religion, for the Islamic religion. And the first pillar is faith. And that faith is more than a belief. That faith is a knowing. Faith is actually a surety that we know everything is going to be okay. And sometimes we actually turn this power of faith around so that we know things are not going to be okay. And it's very interesting that when we turn faith around and we have faith in the negative, that many times the negative occurs. It's instructive. But these 2 guys, they had faith that everything was going to be okay. And so they didn't even know it at the time because they hadn't been exposed to these 5 pillars, but they had put into effect this first, even though they weren't Muslims, they had put into effect this first pillar of Islam. Well, they went and found their hotel for the night, and in the morning, they woke up hearing this call that was going through the pre-dawn air. Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar, over and over, and it means God is great. They heard it ringing out, and they knew that this was that people prayed at multiple times in the day. And this is the second pillar of Islam is prayer. And the reason that they pray, by the way, the reason that they pray 5 times a day is not because the reason for it is not because they're so devout, although they are. The reason that they pray 5 times a day is because the philosophy is that they need to be reminded 5 times a day. And so they begin by saying God is great. And understand that Islam is the purest monotheistic religion, is that they don't allow any kind of thing to look like they're saying that something else is God besides God. Right? So so they pray 5 times a day to remind themselves that God is great and that God is one. And that they are indeed part of this, and many of them, except for the Sufis, don't. The Sufis are actually also Islamic, but they've got a little bit more of a mystical kind of outlook on it. But this reminder, this prayer, this continual prayer every day, is to remind them that God is with them, and that they are with God. And as the Sufis would say, that they are actually one with God. So this prayer is continually going on throughout the day, and you hear it being called out as a reminder. And they happen to get there during Ramadan. Now Ramadan is a fasting time, and this is the 3rd pillar, by the way. The 3rd pillar of Islam is fasting, and so they're in the marketplace. And they were just amazed in the marketplace because it seemed desert country, seems like there's not much going on, but they go in the marketplace and there's all this fresh fruit and vegetables and everything that they really could possibly want was in the marketplace. And people were there shopping and getting their various things for the day. And they sat in a little corner stall at a table and got some tea. And there was a man there who noticed them and saw, of course, that they were foreigners, and he began to talk to them. And they said, well, we noticed you've got all of this food and stuff here, and everything's going on. I said, but nobody is eating anything. Nobody's drinking anything. And he says, well, it's Ramadan. And he said at Ramadan, we from sunrise to sunset, we neither drink, nor eat, nor have relations with our wives. And the one guy said, well, why? In the midst of all, in the midst of all this seeming abundance here, why would you deny yourself? Why would you do this? And he said, well, it's the third pillar of Islam is fasting. And he said, and the reason that we do it is to teach us that our soul is stronger than our body. So, and isn't this something that we talk about? Now, I'm trying to shift perspective here, right? So here's this idea. We're talking about here almost every Sunday, we're talking about we are not our body, that we are something greater than our body. So here's a discipline that is built into this faith that we teach ourselves during Ramadan, through the fast, that our souls, our spirit is stronger than our body. We say no to the body's desires for a certain period of time each day. Well, after they cleared the marketplace, they packed their stuff up and they started their ride. And the first part of the ride was a flat ride through some pretty hot desert country. And they come across, during their ride, they came across this guy who also was on bicycle, and he had broken down. And they stopped and helped him put his bike back together, and they gave him some water to drink. And the guy was like very thankful, and they didn't think much of it. And they continued on their way and rode some distance, and came to a small walled city. And at this walled city, the gate happened to be open, but it was closed. So they opened the gate and they came in, and there was in the center of the town square there was a well, and so it was very hot, and they leaned their bikes against the side of the well, and they drew up some water. They filled their water bottles, and they sat there drinking some water and kind of sat in as much in the shade as they could get. And after a little while, there was nobody in the square at all. And after a little while, a young woman came out with her apron full of something, they couldn't see what. And she came over to them and she opened the apron up and gave them this fruit, some blood oranges, some welcome relief from the heat of the day. And of course, they were thankful. And they were vocal in their thanks to her, and she said no. There's no need to thank me, because this is what we are taught. Because the fourth pillar of Islam is charity. And so here is this lesson that they had participated themselves in the fourth pillar earlier in the day, helping the guy along the road, helping him get his bike back running again, and giving him water, and then they were given to, and it was given because this is what the girl was saying. This is how we live. We live by charity. We live by giving. We live by service. And this again, here is a change of perspective for us, especially living in this predominantly consumer society, that when we learn that we live by giving, it changes everything. And we don't need, it's fine to get thanks, and when we get thanks, we should accept the thanks. We get thanks and we should say, you're welcome. But the fact is, we give because we live by giving. That this fifth pillar of Islam can instruct us just as well, that charity is the way to go. And then they had to climb the mountains. And by the way, these mountains, the mountain range that they climbed is called the Alborz. the Alborz Mountains, and they are not hospitable. A hard climb. They started too late in the day, and it ended up going dark while they were in the middle of the climb. Now I want you to think about this, the scene as how it must have been. These are not paved roads like if you're driving through Colorado and you're climbing the mountains. Listen, try to just climb the mountains in Colorado and you see that it's not some easy feat. I mean, it's tough, but the roads are paved and they are wide. There's plenty of room. There's not big rocks in the way, and but here, where the mountain that they were climbing, as you got towards the top, the road got narrower. There were times it was dark. It was dark, and they just kept pushing on because they were afraid to stop. But there were many places along the road where it got so narrow that they could easily have gone off the edge. They could have plummeted to their deaths. And finally, when they get to the point where they can go no farther, very interesting, they see a little hut off to the side, and there's light shining through the gaps in the door. And they go and knock on the door, and the guy comes out that lives there, and he welcomes them, and he thinks they're nuts. And he's trying to talk to them in broken English as to why in the world are you climbing this mountain in the middle of the night? Don't you know the road is dangerous and it's narrow, and I'm surprised you didn't go off the edge. And they explained to him what they were doing, that they felt this need, that they wanted to explore this country, and they almost felt like they'd been compelled to come and do these things. And the guy said, "Oh, you're on a pilgrimage." Well, and this is the fifth pillar of Islam.